Thank you, Jared. Good morning. Welcome to First Fridays. Please make your way to a seat this morning. Can they even hear me? Gotcha. Okay. Okay, so I need to use my outside voice for inside. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Welcome to First Fridays. Glad you are here. If you can make your way toward a seat this morning, that would be wonderful. So how many of you, this is your first time to a First Fridays event? Oh, that's wonderful. Welcome. So let's give them a warm welcome this morning. Thank you for coming. So everyone ready for Christmas? That's good. So we are excited that you are here this morning. And for those of you who are not as familiar with First Fridays, we are a leadership and networking forum. And so it's so glad that you are here. Welcome. And I would like to get started. We're going to dive right in, and I'm going to introduce Cassie this morning, who's going to introduce our speaker that we know that you will really enjoy. Thank you.
Thanks, Jan. Thanks. Good morning, everybody. It's so exciting to see some new faces here today, and it's my privilege to introduce Kristen this morning. So Kristen is a certified diplomat for the American College of Lifestyle Medicine and leverages her education, training, and life experience to help people make long-term lifestyle changes that target the root cause of disease to improve health and wellness. Kristen currently works in wellness within our local hospital system. She concurrently holds a position to provide keynotes on the connection between leadership and well-being, which is a great lesson for all of us in this room to learn, with the purpose of achieving your best when it matters most. She founded the nonprofit Live Healthy Hoosiers in 2013 to help leaders enhance their capacity to handle stressors in a world where lines are blurred between our jobs and personal lives. So please join me in welcoming Kristen this morning.
Good morning. Well, thank you. So my name is Kristen Ruble, as Cassie said, and I am here today to talk a little bit about health behaviors. But we're going to shift it a little bit. So we're talking about health behaviors in December. So we're looking probably toward like New Year's resolution kind of stuff, right? For most of us, anybody? New Year's resolutions, thinking about changing stuff? Okay, well, I want to kind of change that up a little bit and go from a New Year's resolution shift to something that becomes a happier and healthy you for long term. So not just every December when we're thinking about it in January, but actually for the long term, forever, the rest of your life. And so the way that we're going to do that is we're going to meet a few objectives here. So we have to first start to understand where our performance actually matters. We have to build a foundation actually from lifestyle medicine, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what that means. We're going to identify 2 reasons why those health behaviors usually don't stick, so then we can navigate that. And then we're going to start creating that health behavior change. And so, like Cassie was saying, I usually couple health behaviors with leadership. So I'm getting my doctorate in looking at that from a research perspective. So everything that I'm going to talk about today is based on research, whether in the past in different health behavior programs that I've led, or in the future as I'm looking ahead to write that dissertation. So in order to achieve those objectives, we actually have to do 3 things here in this room today. It requires us to look at our health behaviors a little bit differently. So the way you currently look at them, you have to change that perspective. And I'm going to help you do that today. The second one, it's going to challenge your current thinking. So you know the definition of insanity, anybody? Just kidding. But we're going to challenge that current thinking today. We're going to have to manipulate it in order to get us to where we want to be with health behaviors that are sustainable. And then the last is we're going to have to step into something that's a little bit uncomfortable. So let's start. Let's talk about performance. Does anybody know the definition of performance? Anybody? Yeah, what does Google tell us? So actually, Google would tell us that performance is actually the completion of a task. But when we are thinking of performance in our life, don't we think about it in how we show up to people, places, and things that matter most to us? We think about it a little bit differently, right? So could you name for me some things or some areas in which performance actually matters in your life? Where does performance matter? In our work. Yeah, absolutely. We spend the most amount of our time there. So for sure. Where else? Your relationships. Yes, absolutely. What was that? Oh, and exercising? Yeah, our performance and whether or not we're pushing ourselves to increase our fitness. Yep, that could work. One more. Yeah, and our sleep. So another health behavior. We have to be able to perform there. So performance actually matters here. In all the research that I've done in health behavior change, performance matters in these particular areas for most people. So we're looking at family, spirituality, work, health, finances, friends, community, and happiness. And actually the top 3 that come up for most people are family, work, and health. Those are the top 3 that I hear all the time. So that's where performance actually matters. So here's what we're going to do. You have a piece of paper in front of you, and I want you in that first left-hand column to list where performance matters to you, not necessarily to where we just all defined, but where does it actually matter to you? So if you can just jot that down. And then while you're doing that, in that second column next to it, I would like you to rank it. What matters most? What do you give number 1? And second, third, and if you have 8, 9, 10 things there, rank them. Nothing can be tied. And then in that final column, we're going to score what matters on a scale of 1 to 10. 10 being you're performing in that area that matters most to you at 100%. You give everything. You're not short in any way, shape, or form in that area. A 1, you have so much room for improvement. You are really struggling in performance in that area. So go ahead and score what matters. And if you really just want to focus on your top 3, you can do that. And does anybody want to share their number 1, what matters most? Yeah. Your health matters most to you? Okay. And do you want to tell me that was your number 1 rank? And how do you score in that particular area on a scale of 1 to 10?
The last couple months, I would say between a 7 and an 8.
Okay. So you have some room for improvement, but you're doing pretty well overall. That's a passing grade on a test last time I was in school. Right? Okay. So here what we've just done is what we call a performance gap analysis. You are able to look at the areas that matter most to you in your life, and you're able to see where your performance is struggling and if you need to step it up a little bit. And the way that we're going to do that is I'm going to talk to you a little bit about theory for a second. Has anybody heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Okay, most people have. So this is a theory, okay? This is a theory, but it's been put to the test for a lot of times. You can see at the very top, that is actually self-actualization, which means it is being your best self. You are the best mother, father, brother, spouse, coworker, boss, leader, etc. possible. That's at the very top. But theoretically, in order to be at the very top, we have to achieve this bottom part, right? Which is called the foundation. So you're going to see a little bit in your performance gap analysis that aligns with this theory. So in order to be at the very top, we have to meet these basic needs. And I'm just going to talk about this very first one from a physiological perspective. food, water, warmth, and rest. So we need to sleep, we need to eat, and we need to get enough to drink in order to even work our way up to the other pieces. So if we haven't built a foundation, but yet every day we are not just expected but of ourselves, but from other people, like in the workplace, we're expected to be this best self, but we haven't built a foundation, there is no way possible theoretically that we will ever get there. So we should have a gap on our analysis. Does that make sense? Okay, what this theory doesn't do is define to us what food, water, warmth, and rest actually is. And if we were to combine the two from an American College of Lifestyle Medicine perspective, I can define what food, warmth, water, and rest actually looks like. So to build an actual true foundation, for those of us who do not have food, water, warmth, and rest, it's to have the ability to just get it. But for those of us that do have that, we actually have to build that foundation out with healthful eating, which is actually defined from the American College of Lifestyle Medicine as eating mostly plant foods. So we're talking whole grains, legumes, beans, nuts, seeds, fruits, vegetables, with using meat, dairy products, and things like that as condiments on the side, but not necessarily the focal point of our meal. From a physical activity perspective, the American College of Lifestyle Medicine would tell us that we need 150 minutes of moderate exercise per week in order to achieve physical fitness, plus 2 to 3 days of strength training and 2 to 3 days of flexibility. From a managing stress perspective, this is the one we always don't do so well in, because when we manage stress, we hear about how do we reduce stress. And so many of us go to do things like exercise, for example, or we go to get a massage, or we sleep. But all too often, what we're not doing in stress is understanding what is happening to us physiologically. So let me give you an example. Say I'm really, really exhausted and fatigued right now, physiologically. Sometimes I'm like, oh, if I go work out, I will reduce that stress. But I have chose the wrong modality to offset how I'm physiologically feeling. Does that make sense? So if I'm exhausted and fatigued, exercise is not the modality that I should be choosing to offset my stress. It's actually sleep and rest. But so often we choose the wrong pathway from a stress perspective. So you have to honor how you're feeling physiologically before you choose which pathway from a stress reduction perspective you're going. And then we're going to do those three. And then the one in the middle here is improving your sleep. Sleep, the American College of Lifestyle Medicine says 7 to 9 hours per night of uninterrupted sleep. And if we doze off during the day, that means something's wrong with our 7 to 9 hours during the night. So maybe we're waking up too much. So those are the 4 areas that I want to talk about from a definition of building that foundation. So the question is, how do we do this? I'm sure you're asking. How do we do this? With this, how many of us feel this way? We're at work the most amount of the time per day, okay? So most of us don't have that as our number one performance area. It is in our performance list, but it's not ranked first. But we have all these demands. The CDC says our jobs are number one stressor. Employees are suffering depression, stress, and anxiety in the workplace. And we have more stress than previous generations. And then the scope, the scale, and the speed of what we have to do are ever increasing. In fact, how many of you say this year's baselines, even if it's you hit the ball right out of the park, home run, this year's home runs become next year's baselines? How is that even fair? And then we're just going through this cycle again. So I need you, this is what American College of Lifestyle Medicine would say, I need you to exercise, eat well, manage your sleep, reduce your stress, all while doing this. And if you perform really well this year, I'm going to make it more stressful for you next year. Right? That's kind of the world we live in. And it's very terrible, but it is. It's very terrible that they put those demands on us. But we have the ability to become resilient by just increasing our capacity to meet demands. So now we have to just increase our capacity. And the way to increase that capacity is working in those 4 particular areas. So how do we work in those areas? You're going to ask this question. Well, how do we successfully adopt healthy behaviors and perform at our best in areas that matter most to us, despite those demands. If I were to ask you this, and you were to kind of look at these pictures, these are kind of hints of these look like athletes that are really, really good at what they're doing. What would be the answer to this question? What do you think? Yeah, who said that? Ooh, if I had a prize, I'd throw it at you. Yes, you have to train just like an athlete. So from an analogy perspective, just like athletes have to do all of this training day in, day out, so do we as potential corporate athletes or leadership athletes. We have to go into training. And I'm going to put this analogy into kind of in a video here for you. Has anybody ever heard of the pilot named Sully? Yeah, okay. So I'm going to play a video here about training and how training is so very important and how performance really matters, right? Because we're going to get to that, and how all these demands of life come at us, okay? So we're going to play this video. And if you're not aware of Sully, Sully is a pilot who flew a plane, and there happened to be no engine working after a bird hit both of the engines, and Sully had to make a last-minute decision to either crash or save people's lives. So most people aren't going to choose crashing, so he had to make a last-minute decision in New York City to land the plane on the Hudson River. So I'm going to go ahead and play this video for you. Yeah, despite the demands coming at him, right, from other people. And if we use the analogy of birds for our demands of our life, we, as the plane or the captain, whichever one you want to choose to pretend you are today, we have birds coming at us left and right, right? We have all of these demands in our lives every single day, and yet we have to steer our own plane to make sure that we could sometimes just land on the Hudson, okay? Yet what we're trying to do is fly high and sail and no turbulence, but sometimes we have days that look like this in our normal lives. And so we have to be able to put training into place to remain calm and be able to perform under pressure. And what I mean be able to perform in those areas that you listed that matters most to you. So you have to be able to build that foundation of exercise, sleep, reducing stress, and eating well in order to be able to perform at your very best, despite the demands that we already talked about and the curveballs flying at us or the birds flying at us, okay? So that's kind of what we're all expected to do on a daily basis to manage our health behaviors. So this is pretty much common knowledge. Would we all agree? We'd all agree? It's common knowledge, but it's not common practice at all. Not common practice. And so the question then becomes, if it's not common practice, how do we start this that's new and familiar? How do we fly the plane, remain calm with the birds that are coming at us and trying to make our engines die? How do we make it sustainable? Health behaviors, looking at the analogy. Well, we have two things that I want to talk about today that are actually holding us back when we link our health behaviors. The first one is our motivators. So we commonly link our motivators into these two particular things. So for example, I want to start a new health behavior. I'm thinking of a New Year's resolution, and I say, okay, I want to lose weight this year, diabetes, and I want to reverse diabetes. I don't want to die. I don't want to be sick, and I don't want to gain more weight. And so we link this, and we think that as we engage in these new health behaviors, linking it to fear is going to be sustainable. In fact, we're so scared of the fear that we actually revert in our health behaviors so early on after we making this New Year's resolution. So fear, in all of the research and health behavior participants that I've worked with, fear is not a motivator that we need to link change, okay? So if that's what you're currently doing today, this is where I'm asking you to, it requires a new lens and changing of thought process. We have to move away from fear and thinking about your disease state and the weight that you've gained, and go to something that is going to actually stick or help your health behaviors stick. The second one is success, We have to get away from success too. Although it's more positive, it's better than fear, it's also not sustainable. And here's why. Success, losing weight or training for that marathon or what have you, success motivation all has end goals. After you lose the weight, what now with those health behaviors? After you train for the race and cross the finish line, do you still exercise? So you're always going to have, from success-based motivation, you're always going to have another end goal, or you're going to need one in order to constantly engage yourself in the health behaviors that you want for yourself. So success and fear, not sustainable. They are for the 3 months of your New Year's resolution, but beyond that, they won't get you anywhere. So then the question is, what does get us sustainable? And it's actually values. So in every participant that I've come across that has sustainable weight loss or sustainable health behavior change has linked their change into something of value. And what I mean by value is on your paper where performance actually matters. So what do I mean by that? If value or where performance matters, I want to change my exercise habits or eating habits, and I want them to be sustainable for the long term. I have to link that back to my family. So let me give you a story. I worked with a CEO of an organization when I used to work with Johnson & Johnson's Human Performance Institute and used to fly around the country prior to having children. And I worked with this CEO, and he said to me, I usually come home at 7:30 every night, and I go home and I sit on the couch and I put my feet up, and my kids, I love my kids, but they come rushing at me and they're like, Daddy, Daddy, let's go build Lego towers. Daddy, Daddy, let's go do this. And he says, hey, wait a second. I'm very tired right now, okay? I had a long day at work. 1 second, 1 second. And so the next night, he comes home at 9 p.m., so 90 minutes later. His kids are already in bed and they're fast asleep, but he walks in and he gives them a hug and a kiss and he wakes one of his sons up. And the son says, Dad, can you read me a book? So the dad reads him a really quick story. The boy goes back to sleep. The next morning he wakes up and the little boy tells his older brother, and they both shout at Daddy and they say, Daddy, Daddy, can you come home at 9 p.m. every night? What does that say? Yeah, it's quality, right? And so what he told non-verbally to them at 7:30 was, I have no time for you. He said that non-verbally. But at 9 p.m., he said, I have 3 minutes for you, and I'm going to be focused and more engaged and read you a story. But from a value perspective, okay, it's quality over quantity. So I want you to think about that when you're thinking of time issues that you may have. And then how do you circle it back to your number one? So for me, family. If I go exercise, how do I show up at home when I get there as a better version of myself as a mother, right? So that question is, okay, I'm more engaged, I'm more focused, I can make eye contact, I can get down to their level and have a conversation, I can give hugs and I can say, yes, I can read you that story. Versus telling you that I'm exhausted and I have to work on myself for a second and not and ignore you. So thinking about that. Additionally, when that alarm clock goes off, asking yourself, how is me getting up right now to go exercise, as an example, going to help me show up to that number one? Or if there's a gap in your performance where you scored, how does it increase your scoring of that particular performance area? So that's values. And your top 3 of your performance areas are your values, okay? And the beauty about values here are that values now become boundaries. And so if you didn't have any boundaries before, you do now with values. And if you did have boundaries before, but they were cracked or broken, this is where you're going to be able to identify where you need to strengthen them. So I'm going to give an example that everyone probably is very, very familiar with right now during COVID, which is working overtime. At least in the healthcare industry, I see it all the time. So if I choose to work overtime all the time, I'm not setting a boundary, nor am I aligning to what I believe my performance areas are? So the only time overtime becomes a problem is when that outlier becomes the norm. So outliers are okay. So I need to help my work family because performance does matter in that regard too, although it's not my number one, but it does matter. And so I do need to work overtime sometimes, but when it becomes not the outlier anymore, that's when you can identify that it's a problem. So then the second thing I want to talk about are stories. Stories are the second thing that is holding us back to having sustainable health behavior change. So what is a story? A story is something that we tell ourselves and we tell other people about why we are doing something or why we aren't doing something. We tell a story. And with that story, we have to bridge a gap. So if I'm saying, for example, I'm not exercising, but I really want to be, I have to tell you why I'm not doing that, and I have to tell myself why I'm not doing that. So it bridges the gap. And all of my stories, and I'm sure all of yours too, are based on truth. They're absolutely based on truth, but they're not 100% reality. And so in order to have sustainable health behavior change, we have to break down these stories. So if you want to flip your paper over for me, we're going to go through this exercise. We have to look at what's perception and what's actually reality. So examples would include not having enough time or having to work, child obligations, etc., all based on truth. But what happens is these partial truths, they become brick walls. You look at them like brick walls, like there's no way around them, under them, over them, etc. And so we define that reality of the truth in order to break that story down to have sustainable health behaviors. So let's look at this story. We're going to break it apart. My story is I have no time to exercise. I just don't have the time. I'm constantly running around. In partial truth, I do not have much time. My schedule is actually truly jam-packed, and I do have a lot of obligations. Could any of us agree with that? Yeah? But here's the reality. If I really take a step back, right, requires a new lens, challenges our current thinking about my time that I have, I actually do have 15 minutes to walk while my son's in soccer practice. So I have taken a step back and I have looked at my story from a different perspective. So everybody knows there's two sides to every story, right? Can't be proven guilty until we hear both sides and get all of the information. So let me talk about perception here. What do we see in this picture here? A face. Right. Two things. Time, whether I have enough time or not enough time, right? Two sides of every story. Fair? How about this one? Faces, and what was the other one? A vase. Yep, two faces or a vase. Two sides to every story. I didn't have time to make breakfast, so I went to McDonald's. Those are the vase. Instead, I can make what McDonald's made in half the amount of time while I'm still at home in the microwave. That's the other side of the story. Perception, perspective. We have to break our story down. So I'm going to give you a second here to write on your paper, what is your story? What's holding you back? Is it time? Why is your performance not a 10 in the area that matters most to you? And if it is, you are my role model. And then what is that story based on truth? What's the truth? Because all stories are based on truth, even fiction stories. And then lastly, what is actually your reality? Where can you change your perspective and your thought process and see the man playing the saxophone as opposed to just the lady's face? Does anybody want to share? Nobody will make eye contact. Anybody want to share their story? Or give us a story that we can break down? Yes.
So I recently had to go through this process because I got stuck in the I don't have any time and realized that the truth was I don't have energy. And so I went and got a sleep study and found out that I don't have the energy because I have a sleep disorder. And so all of the things that I keep making excuses about I don't have the time to do, it wasn't about time, it was about managing my energy, learning to take care of managing the sleep disorder so that I have the energy to be able to do the things that I need to do.
To create that foundation to be able to be self-actualized. Yeah, so good thing you got that sleep study because you would have never known that. So there you go. So you're using one story that you're telling yourself when it's actually something else that's hindering you. Wonderful. Anybody else? Yes.
I've just been doing this with my coach lately, and just this week I have been working my business. I like it to work in person. That kind of helped me hand out to the virtual. It's not virtual, but not a lot. My favorite is in person. But, so my truth is, I have to learn the virtual stuff and get comfortable with it. I don't have time for that. I'm resisting that.
Mm-hmm.
My reality is, I can do either both.
Right.
Make work.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Right. You have the ability to learn and be educated in that particular area to expand the basis of your modality. Yeah. Wonderful. So what her truth was, partial truth, she didn't have enough time, but in reality, she just needed a little bit of push and education in that area to combine the two together. Wonderful. So if we're able to break apart our stories, we know that they only sound best to the person making them up, because if you all tell me your story or I tell you my story, don't you usually kind of give a little fake eye roll or yeah, right? So remember this, stories sound best to the person making them up. So I'm going to bring this all full circle for you. So 4 things we talked about today. We talked about performance. We talked about your motivators, whether it's fear, success, or value-based. We talked about your stories, and we have to build that foundation in order to ever perform in our very best, okay? So we're not talking about those health behaviors because we said those are common knowledge, just not common practice. So I'm going to pull this together for you with just another quick video. I was originally going to have videos of all of your number 1 things in which performance matters most to you, but that was quite a difficult challenge. So I pulled something together that is meaningful to me. So my family, we do triathlons. So that's swimming, biking, and running. For those of you who don't know, who participates in triathlons? Anybody here? Oh, yes. What distance?
I did an Ironman last month.
Great. This will speak very well to you. Congratulations on that. So I'm going to actually talk about an Ironman athlete here. Has anybody heard, or have you maybe heard of Dick Hoyt and Rick Hoyt? Yeah. Anybody else have? Others. Okay, good. Good. So Dick Hoyt actually just recently passed away, but he is the father of Rick Hoyt, and Rick Hoyt has a disability of cerebral palsy. Okay? And Dick Hoyt was your typical average American with a chronic disease. He had heart disease, high blood pressure, was severely obese, didn't exercise, didn't get enough sleep. And so what can you imagine transpired there is when his son said through a machine, because he has the ability to be able to speak through a machine, said he wanted to run a race. What do you think his father said? No. Right? No. But his son said he wants to do it. So when you look at areas of performance, Dick Hoyt had to say, my performance in areas of what matters most to me and my family is suffering. My performance gap is there. I have a gap. I score myself very low. But in order to be that best father that he aspires to be, he had to build the foundation, okay? And so he knew he had to start with some form of getting well. And so he linked that motivation to something of value, not fear of success. He linked it to his son. And the way that he did that was he started walking and he started working out. And so they participated in their first 5K and they got last place. Wonderful. So in order to have his son, Rick, participate in the races, Dick actually has to push Rick in a wheelchair because Rick has cerebral palsy. He cannot walk. So they got last place. So defeated, but yet staying true to value, he decided to continue training, right? Despite the birds and the demands of life, that he was working 80 hours per week, and he needed to eat better to lose the weight so that he can finish races. So he did a 10K. They moved up in distance, and they got second to last, moving right on along. And he was again defeated, but his son says he felt most alive when he did this races. This is what he told his father through this machine. And so, attending back to value, trying to build that performance gap, he decided to start training. And they did some small triathlons here and there, and then all of a sudden, they got to what we would consider one of the largest endurance events in history called the Ironman. Ironman is 2.4 miles of swimming, 112 miles of biking, and 26.2 miles of running. So we're going to add a marathon on top of all that. And if you're Dick Hoyt, who actually the competitor is actually Rick Hoyt, he is held to every time obligation just like everybody else. So what does that mean? It means he only has 17 hours to complete that, just like anybody else that's not pushing someone in a wheelchair. And each specific sport, swimming, biking, and running, has its own cutoff time too. But if you're Rick, you're the athlete, but you can't do that yourself. So your father has to do it. So he has to swim you in a boat, bike you with you on the bike in a seat, and push you in a wheelchair for running, all while trying to hit the 17-hour mark. But he did it. He stayed true to value. He bridged his performance. He took the stories that he can't do it away with the help of his son. And we're going to watch that here. Wonderful. So just as takeaways for today, despite the workload and demands of life, we need to train for the birds, right? Okay. We need to anchor that change into something of value, right? Going back to performance, not fear, not success. If you want to be sustainable. You don't want that to be a New Year's resolution anymore. It's value-based. We need to build that foundation for both better energy and better performance. Put your oxygen mask, if you will, from a plain analogy, so that you can show up first, so that you better support others, especially those that matter most to you. Separate your stories into what is truth and what is based on truth, and then go out and live your best life. And there's no more New Year's resolutions or New Year's resolution fails, really. Other than that, I will take some questions. Here are the two organizations that I work for, Live Healthy Hoosiers. We put on a corporate 5K every year, and the Live Healthy Summit for health behavior change. And then I'm also the Chief Wellness Officer for the Health Restoration Institute, led by a local physician, where we do live leadership retreats, executive health, physicals, healthy lifestyle programs, and culinary medicine. Thank you.
Does anybody have any questions for Kristen?
Gotta stand in the box, Cassie.
Oh, sorry. Gotta be in the box.
In the box.
Any questions that come up right away? I think one of my biggest takeaways is just the challenge that it's a lot of it's personal, right? It's our choices that we're making, and you've really challenged us to understand what's important to us. One of my questions for you would be, how do we take this out and implement this with others, whether it's friends or family? What would be your suggestions for maybe helping them understand what is important to them and how they can make that shift that we've kind of seen today?
Yeah, so all too often people say they want to lose weight, as an example.
Yeah.
And so a way for you to ask somebody, not just why do you want to lose weight, but if you were to lose weight, tell me how it would make you better in areas that matter most to you. Yeah. And so all too often we focus on the end result of health behaviors, which is weight, versus the actual health behaviors themselves. So you could always ask that question too, is what do you think it takes to lose the weight? And if you were to exercise more, eat better, get enough sleep, manage your stress, how does that help you in your life, in the areas that matter most to you.
Yeah.
So asking those questions.
Sure. Anybody have any questions for Kristen? Jan.
Yeah, so when, sometimes if a friend says, hey, you want to go out to dinner, things like that, and you say yes all the time, and then all of a sudden you say no, well, you might hurt their feelings. But my friends sitting in this room know my excuse or story or how I'm able to state my boundary. I'll say, I would love to go out to dinner, and I will maybe this day, this time, but today I can't because I need to show up for those that matter the most to me. And not that you don't matter to me, but you don't matter the most to me. But I think we all know that from a friend perspective. But friends know this, right? Family comes first. And if we're honest, open, transparent about that, they shouldn't have their feelings hurt. It's today I need to be with my family. But I can, I can't say yes to you all the time, but I can say yes occasionally. It is not, but guess what? It takes what? Yes, training. Right, absolute. Training, practice, synonymous, right? Absolutely. And linking change to values takes training and practice. Identifying where we're lacking in our performance takes practice as well. So we have to, all those things that we do in the dark will eventually show in the light, but we just have to do them. Yes. Right, absolutely. You've got that. Yeah, boundaries and values do not have to hurt people's feelings.
Any other questions? Well, please join me in another round of applause for Kristen. Thank you so much, Kristen. You were awesome. Really amazing. Thank you. Thank you all for joining us today for an excellent presentation here at First Fridays. We look forward to seeing you back in January, the first Friday of the month, just per usual. And we hope you all have a very safe and healthy, happy holiday. Thanks, guys. Have a good weekend.